them, you will need these papers in order to answer some of those. So some of your test questions will come from those papers. I'm very specific. So if you inadvertently threw them away or didn't work in class, be sure you pick those up. Questions or anything for me before we start? Any problems that the grocery people have had that you need to bring to my attention? Yes?
Do you want us to send you just a PowerPoint we put together, or do you want us to, like, send you the questions that we filled out and send them to you?
No, I want the PowerPoint.
Okay.
And then I also want your objectives in your question.
Okay.
Let me just say a couple of things about an objective. So objectives communicate to the learner what you want them to know. Usually it should be under the circumstances that they would want to know. With you all, I don't write classic objectives anymore. They're extremely to the point. A classic objective would be, and I think I've told you all this before, given a patient with an obese patient and their medical history, select the most appropriate medication for the person. So that tells you under what circumstance and what you need to know. And if you know everything's multiple choice, then you know it's an objective test. If it was a more essay, that would be part of it. But here, it seems to be better to be extremely pointed. So you can't test a state. What do I sometimes give you? State a fact. I'll usually point that out. But unless I ask you that, particularly, Caitlin, tell me what this is, I can't test it on an objective test. So educational people would look at me and go, you can't test that on a multiple choice question. Well, that's true, okay? But for our purposes, we're using it as a way to direct you more towards an attention to a fact, is what I'm using. So when you write your objectives, you need to think, because this is how I do it, I sit and think, what would I want a PA to know? Okay. So when you are looking at your fad diet or your grocery store, you need to think about what do I really feel like the biggest takeaways are that I would want a learner or the hearer to know, the audience. And then you write your objective to that point so that you're communicating to them in writing, here's what I want you to know. Test questions are then written off of that because you told them, here's what's most important, here is what I want you to know, and I'm going to assess you on it. Okay, so that's how it follows. Okay. So your objectives we will share with the class. Your test questions I will take. I probably will modify them some point. Last year I asked them, do not share your test questions with each other. Well, they didn't listen to me because they made 100% on all of them. So this morning as I was driving in, I thought, I should tell them that if they all make 100%, I'm just going to toss them. So what I'm asking you to do is to do what I ask. Don't share them with each other. I don't share my test questions with you. They're usually fairly simple. You will do fine off of them if you listen, but don't share them. It absolutely negates an assessment. You might as well not assess because everybody's gotten the material ahead of time. So don't share your questions, please. Okay. Questions about that part of the assignment? I also haven't heard much from you in terms of writing test questions. Test questions are hard to write. And people struggle, and you see how difficult they are because you're on the receiving end. So I'm glad to help you. If I don't hear anything from you, I probably will modify them once I get them, so that they're in language and constructed in a way that's accessible. Does that make sense? Does that offend anybody or hurt your feelings? All right. Okay, let's pick up. So today my attention, I looked at material last night. I think I can get everything done before noon that I want to get done. And so when Peggy Turner is done, you'll be free to go at 3 o'clock. Doesn't mean don't skip her stuff. The integral and TPN are really important to understand that, because a lot of times the dietitians and the team of people who do TPNs, is that mine? I meant to silence it. Excuse me. So my goal today is to get you out by 3 o'clock. And tomorrow, I think I can get everything done so that you can be done when the last group presents. So that's my goal. I'm going to try very hard to accomplish those, but today I'm pretty sure I can get you out by 3. All right, so we're going to pick up on page 14 on Mediterranean diet. A few of you indicated that that's what you follow. The majority of you on the survey, 25 out of the 36, a Western diet. And then it seems to be kind of a mix of 1 or 2 people with different other diets that were mentioned. So whoever's the Mediterranean diet person, if I say things that are different or that you want to add to, please chime in. So there's no one Mediterranean diet because there are so many countries that surround that inland sea that they're varied, but they have common themes. So that's what we're going to go through today. This is a very popular diet in terms of the medical community. They tend to promote it a lot. It's gotten a lot of press because of its health benefits. But most of them have these characteristics if you look under the dietary pattern. So high consumption of fruits, vegetables, and grains. Okay, so you've heard that theme before. In a healthy diet, we talked about that. Potatoes, beans, nuts, seeds. Okay, so the base is really good. Olive oil is their predominant fat source. So that one's high in monounsaturated fats. Okay. So lower, perceived to be better from a cardiovascular standpoint than polyunsaturated or saturated. Dairy products, fish and poultry are consumed, but they're low, and beef is very low. Okay, so their saturated fat intake is low. Okay. And wine is consumed in a low to moderate amount. So that has made it a very popular diet because it's part of the dietary consumption or recommendations. Okay, so let's look at its benefits. So it has been shown to lower LDL. Let me back up. When you are looking at diets and their comparisons, you have to look at what are they comparing it to? Why lower than what? In comparison to what? So if you look at the Mediterranean diet in comparison to a Western diet, you're going to see lower heart disease because you've replaced fats, you have mostly vegetables and grains, so it's a lower fat diet. Western diet is more associated with heart disease. It's thought predominantly because of the higher fat intake and the intake of greater bad fats. Okay. If you compare a Mediterranean diet to a vegetarian diet, you may not see the same health benefits. Last year we had a physician come in who's a big proponent of plant-based diets, and he's kind of over on the extreme of it. But he brought a lot of evidence, and he doesn't like the Mediterranean diet. He feels it's not a good diet. He feels that the science behind it is somewhat skewed, and that there are still, he looks at fats as being very pro-inflammatory. So he didn't like it, and he brought evidence to say, I don't like it. But when and here's the reasons why, but when you look at it, it's because he's comparing it to a very plant-based vegetarian, okay? So keep that in mind as we go through there. When I say it's better than, they're comparing most of these to a Western diet. So lower LDL, well, you've replaced most of the fat sources with non-fat sources, so that makes sense. So LDL is predominantly produced by what, the intake of what dietary food? Saturated fats, okay, so you lower that, you give the body less to make. On the top of page 15, so here they're looking at healthy adults, and they follow those on a Mediterranean diet, lower risk of cardiovascular mortality. So what would those endpoints look like? What's cardiovascular mortality? What kinds of things? Heart attack, what else? Stroke, those would be the big ones, okay? People who ate a Mediterranean diet were less likely to develop heart disease. So small percentages, but if you're dealing with millions of lives, that's a big reduction. Has everybody found where I am? Okay. Then they looked at, the next study is people who had a history of heart disease. So they were 37% less likely to die during a study period. So they looked at a 7-year period. The components that were linked to the Mediterranean diet that lowered the risk of heart failure were high fish intake, moderate alcohol intake, low meat intake. People who ate a Mediterranean diet had less plaque. So what do they mean by plaque?
Atherosclerosis.
So calcium buildup in the coronary arteries, usually in response to an inflammation or a damage to the intima of the coronary artery. They looked at, here's how they characterized a Western diet. Not enough fruits, vegetables, whole grains, too much red meat, desserts, and sugary beverages. Sound familiar? Also a decrease in neurologic diseases like Parkinsonism and Alzheimer's. So a lot of it is tied up in reducing or increasing free radical scavengers and decreasing inflammation. And also reduced incidence of cancer. Slow rates of cognitive decline, reduced conversion to Alzheimer's, improvement in cognitive function. The last bullet there, Harvard study looked at premenopausal women, and they looked at their amount of whole grains. Now look at now that you've started looking at this, 1.5 servings of whole grain isn't a lot. Okay? You're looking at 25 to 30 grams a day, 18% less likely to get premenopausal breast cancer as compared to those who didn't eat any. Okay? So again, it goes back to that small steps pay off, have big dividends, baby steps, big miles. Okay. So let's go down to the key components of the Mediterranean diet. If you look at, this has some interesting aspects to it. So they're looking at the focus of Western diets versus Mediterranean diets. So what do you see the big differences in? Taste. Okay, so they're saying the Mediterranean diet tastes better. Convenience, so Western diets are more convenient, usually ready to go, processed. Pop them in the microwave, the oven, or toaster, whatever.
Health.
Pardon?
Health.
Health.
And variety.
Variety, a big, so they're saying Mediterranean diet brings much more variety. How many of you feel like you eat a varied diet? About half of you, okay. Do you do it intentionally? Okay. Those of you who don't eat a varied diet, why is that?
Broke.
Broke? Okay.
Don't have
Time. How many of you vary your breakfast? That's the one meal I find most people don't vary. I'm pretty patterned. I get up and eat about the same thing every day. And if I switch and I like it, I'll stay with that switch for a while. So I find people tend to vary more their like lunch or their suppers. So here it is. So financial, time, so convenience goes into that. Anything else?
Western energy density,
Right.
I would think it would be more dense of the Mediterranean. Why is it?
They're talking about fat content. So
Oh.
fat is energy dense.
Okay.
Okay. So that's what they mean by that. Cost about the same, food choices about the same, let's see, so that's the majority, okay. So let's look at the key components. Plant-based, fruit, vegetables, whole grain, legumes, nuts. Very, what we said, a healthy diet. Again, decreasing free radical. So a lot of free radical scavengers in these foods. Average of 9 servings a day, fruits and vegetables. How much in I told you this, I think, in diabetes, what in Oklahoma, how do we fare in terms of 9 servings a day?
French fries are number 1.
We're what?
French fries were number 1.
We're number 1 and that's in getting 1 a day. Okay. So we are very poor in this state of doing it. Why would you venture to say that's the case? Convenience, okay.
Education.
Education is some.
Income.
Income,
Rural areas.
rural areas. Some of it's availability. When I did health fairs in the southern and southwestern part of the state, found horrendous triglycerides and high blood pressure. A lot of people told us it's just what you have available. They might have it in the grocery store, but if they go out to eat, they said, and a lot of them did, they said there's just no place to go that has a wide variety of healthy foods on their menu. Okay, so they don't have trans fats in the Mediterranean diet. They tend to use the olive oil. They don't use butter. They tend to dip their bread in or use olive oil if they're going to use that, so that's different. Nuts, so seeds and nuts are a high part, so that gives you a lot of those polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats. But they avoid candy, honey roasted, and heavily salted nuts. Those are my favorite. Okay, next page. What about cost? Does this one do cost? This is not a cost one. This was a food bank that taught people how to do a healthy diet over a 6-week period, and then they followed up to see what people did, and they did do food expense. So they saw a decrease in food expense, decrease in purchases of meat, and consumptions of junk food. So information pays off. Now, you can also say that people who came to the classes probably were more interested, so they were more likely to do it. But, so don't forget that those things can have a real emphasis. Also, this last one suggests that 2 to 3 vegetarian meals per week increases fruit and vegetable consumption, helps with weight control. This goes to that incrementalism that I talked about on Tuesday, is getting people to slowly make adjustments. When I was at the VA and I worked in the lipid clinic, one thing we did with the dietitians is that we would ask people to just 1 meal a week, make it a meatless meal. So then we would talk to them about protein sources, like just have beans and cornbread, or things that were kind of fit into what they were used to. So suggesting meatless meals. The other is to drop off, if they're big beef consumers, sorry, Kendall, is to drop off. Do you all do beef for consumption? Okay, so.
I don't eat it every day. I don't eat it every day.
Mark's dad was a farmer, big cotton, cattle, and if we ever sat down and had chicken, he would get up and he'd go look outside and he'd say, "I don't see any chickens on this place." So we had beef most of the time when I was at their house to eat, and very good beef too. So getting people just to drop in consumption and teaching them what are good replacements. Those help. So you can see a big, now they didn't do markers of health in terms of biochemical, but they found that people's practices, which we think are linked to health, did improve, and as did the cost. Make sense? Okay. All right. So I think Mediterranean is good. Did I skip a page? What did I put? Sorry. I feel like I skipped some.
Yeah, 16.
Oh, because I did, didn't I? 15. Okay, let me make a couple of comments. I thought I had it in here, but maybe I moved it. So in terms of conveniences is different, so if people are switching, they may have to relearn, may have to go to the grocery store more often. It is not a weight loss diet. Okay. So if you're wanting weight loss, this is not the one to choose. The other is alcohol in moderation. So what does that mean? For women, that means what?
1 drink a day.
And they're talking about wine in this one, red wine. So that's how many ounces? 5. And for men, it would be 10. And they do recommend men over 65 start to follow the lesser guidelines of 5 ounces a day. I know I put that in there. I don't know where it is. Sorry. 16. That's why. I don't have a page 16. Here it is. Sorry. I got them out of order. I think I covered most of it on page 16. Oh, the terms about extra virgin olive oil, those go to the process, so the less processed are the more virgin or extra virgin. Talked about monounsaturated, fatty fish. So the recommendations for fatty fish a week is how many? 2. So they recommend 2. Fatty fish are high in omega-3s. It lists down there the benefits of those. We talked about this a long time ago in another module. I can't remember which one, probably lipids, when we talked about fish oil. So fish oil is really good at decreasing triglycerides and will increase HDL. Usually those two always go in opposite directions. If you can get triglycerides down, then your HDL will come up. The other is that they decrease platelet adhesion. So one of the things that people will complain about, if they take more than 2 to 3 grams of fish oil a day, they start brushing their teeth, they'll notice their gums will bleed. And a lot of that's due to that effects on platelets. So there is some small data that has some evidence that it decreases cardiovascular events, probably due to that effect on platelets and some of the effects on HDL. Anytime you can get people to eat instead of supplement, it's better. So getting it through the diet is usually a better way, so promoting that. The other is very similar to the macrobiotic diet, is the enjoyment of meals. How many of you enjoy your meal? Really? Wow. I just blaze through a meal. To me, it's just, I like food, love food, but it's like, okay, I gotta get this done, and I just blaze through it. So I'm not a big sit down and enjoy a meal. I wish I was. Growing up we did. Everybody ate together, and it was a more enjoyable, but now it's just like, Dr. Britt and I don't eat anything alike, so we don't even cook together. He does his stuff, I don't do mine. The only time we ate together is when we had Cameron, because I felt like he needed something normal, but other than that, once he was gone, we have reverted back to our old ways. Okay, got most of that. Okay, sorry about that. I'll check my page numbers for you. Okay, any questions or comments? Those of you who have tried it, anybody tried it, didn't like it, or couldn't stick with it? Pardon?
Oh, I really like Mediterranean.
You like Mediterranean? Okay. Ever heard of it before now? Okay, so most of you are aware of it. Okay, good. All right, plant-based diets. Plant-based are there. It really doesn't have a specific diet. It's more that is the base of the diet. Let's see if I've got it. Plant-based. So people who tell you that eat a plant-based diet may have a variety of meats, vegetables. Meats or dairy. So if they tell you I eat a plant-based diet, you need to inquire more about the other things that they may include in that, because it isn't like vegetarians where it's more specific. So asking about that is important. Sometimes they will look for meat sources that are like grass-fed, range, free-range, local, organic. They may look for those terms. That might be hard for people in different parts of the state to find those. Fish. We talked about vegans. Their limitations of dairy may be very restrictive or fairly liberal. Some will even avoid gelatin since it's made out of the hoofs of animals or animal collagen. Whole foods, again, they may reject a food because of the way it's processed or the animal is treated. There's a lot to say here. Health benefits for plant-based diets where it's mostly plant, minimal animal. Again, lower risk of diabetes, lower risk of cardiovascular disease. I have a lot more to say about the plant-based. I want to talk about MyPlate. How many of you are familiar with MyPlate or have used it? Some of you, okay. So this has been around for a while. It's undergone several different variations. It is intended to teach people about how to construct a plate of food in proportion. This is the one from the Harvard Chan School of Nutrition. I really like this group. They put out a newsletter. I signed up for them. I really like their literature, the things that they develop for patients, and their research is really good. So you can get these plates. We usually, at the family medicine, we would get them from different reps would bring them in. The other thing we did is we made our own placemats. So we took the plate and we put it on a sheet of paper and we laminated it. So we got the big 11 by 17 and the big laminating paper, and we would do that, and then we give it to them. We tell them, put it at your plate and then put your plate on top of it. Or you can buy plates, like cafeteria plates. Didn't you have these plates as kids? I don't know if you ate at the cafeteria. So those kinds, they're very geared for that. So if you look, let's see. So MyPlate was developed by the USDA, and it divided it into the 5 food groups. And they were pretty much 30% grains, 40% vegetables, 10% fruit, 20% protein, small circle represents dairy. So the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate is just a little bit of variation on there, and they tried to give the patient more education about what each of those mean. So this is a really good tool. We used it a lot in the diabetes clinic. We would give them out to everybody who saw the dietitian, and helping them with portion control, and then how to construct a plate. This is the Harvard one, so they have a little bit more information in terms of size and what to avoid or what to include. So those are downloadable. Hit your reps up for them if they come in, especially your diabetes reps. Those will be the ones that probably would have those. Some sources that I really like, I like Calorie King. Lauren, if you've got some, chime in there. This one's good. You can go online, you can get their book. They have, you can search for name brand, which I like. And it has all the food products from all the major chains in one book. I kept it in the clinic with me. I used it a lot. I would take it out and show people, or I would, since everybody has a computer in their rooms most days, or most places now, is I would just bring it up. It's like, okay, let's look at what you had for lunch. Bring it up on the computer and show them. Here's what you ate. Here's what's normal. Helps a lot. Showing them, or even giving them. We would, for patients who would meet certain goals, we would give them one. So they're very good that you can look them up and it will tell you the calorie count, the fat, the sodium, the carbohydrates, the proteins. When you've got, especially in diabetes, it's very helpful. Lipids, very helpful. It also gives them information on how to burn those calories through different exercises. So I'd highly recommend this one. Another one that I like a lot, I don't know if I put the, I really like the USDA. I think it's more for you, a provider, or someone who's really serious about their calories and their nutrition, because it's a multi-step site. You have to walk through a lot of things, but you get a lot of information in the end. So I've given you the link there. You can enter the food or a descriptor of the food, and it links you to all the nutrition. So yesterday, a student came in and they were wanting to know how much calcium's in a mango. Well, you don't get a lot of data off of looking at some sites, but if you go into the USDA, it will tell you every micronutrient that's in there. and all the minerals and trace minerals. So it's really a good one if you're really wanting detail. So I would highly recommend that one. I don't know that I'd recommend it to most patients, but it's out there for probably the more serious. The others, you can go to a manufacturer's website. So almost any food that someone is eating, you can bring up on the screen and look at it. So I did that a lot in clinic. People were telling me about foods that I wasn't familiar with. I'd go in and I'd look at it. Or if they were choosing very high calorie or foods or they were using a lot of it, I'd bring it up on the screen and I'd show them. Here's what you're doing. Here's the appropriate amount to eat. Here's what would be best if you're going to choose this. So those are really helpful. And then your nutrition facts label, which is what we went through the first day in your skills, is showing those. So in our clinic, we kept a lot of food models so that we could show people, here's what a portion size is, or they could tell us what they were eating. The other is that we collected foods that people ate on a frequent basis. And then we could bring them out. So in our clinic, everybody brought in their regular stuff all the time. We would keep soda bottles of, empty soda bottles, like 20-ounce containers, and we put all the sugar in there so we could pull it out and go, this is how much sugar you're eating. So all those visual cues are helpful to people, that they can start to understand what would be best for them, what would move them to health, or what will help them with weight control or blood sugar control. Those are my little pearls or tips. Anybody have any of theirs that they want to share? Yes.
I don't remember exactly what it was called, but one of my friends in undergrad was the OU football's nutrition person. And they had a site that he would go in, which was for athletes, but he would go in and tell the athlete, like, you've had this much protein today, for dinner you need to have this much. And so you could use that for patients somehow, like to tell them, like, if you've had this much for breakfast, make sure you eat this much for lunch. So that could be helpful.
I like MyFitnessPal with regards to that, because it'll tell you macronutrients per meal. It'll tell you what you've done to this point in the day. So I like it from that standpoint. I really haven't used a lot of other apps. What's the other one you all use?
My macros.
My Macros. So tell me about that one. What do you like about that?
Well, I do a lot of weight training, so I do like a ratio. I don't really count calories. So like my ratio is like 35 for carbs and protein, and then I think 30% for fat. So I don't really count calories
Okay.
or carbs. It's just kind of like a percent.
Okay, so how do you enter data?
They have food. It's kind of like MyFitnessPal.
Mm-hmm. So you choose a food, and then it will tell you.
It'll tell you like your macros and also your micromolecules. And then if they don't have like the data, you can enter it yourself.
Okay. Yeah. Any others that people use? So you might become familiar with one that you can show people. To me, MyFitnessPal is easy, so I would show patients all the time how to get in there and use it. Or I would teach the students how to do it, and then they could do it when I was going out the door and moving on to the next person. Okay. All right, that's all the healthy diet stuff. Questions or comments? Okay. Let's do this. Let's just go ahead and take a break, come back at 1:45.